Do you love drawing and love nature? But when you try and combine the two, your drawings end up getting very tangled. It becomes very hard to work out what's what, or else you simplify it so much that it doesn't capture the abundance of the scene, the profusion of the natural elements that we so often have around us and that we so often enjoy. Let me show you in this demo how I do it. And at the end, I'll make a few comments particularly involved with bringing the scene together and doing those final marks, make some observations about that. So don't miss that at the end. But at this point, with my 0.3 millimeter pen, I'm just providing some marks to indicate where these trees, these main trees, are going to be in the foreground, and position them and try and get them looking the right proportions, the right shapes. By using this method, rather than trying to just do outlines, I have a chance of creating a far more three-dimensional looking shape. And I also get to make minor corrections, push trees in on one side or let them out on the other side, so to speak, depending on what sort of values are coming up against that edge, whether it's dark value or light value. But you'll often see me in this making slight adjustments to the thickness of the trunks or to their bending degree. So these are the things that it's much easier to do if we're not committed with long continuous lines, which I actually don't think usually capture the effect of the silhouette of a tree trunk very well anyway. But at this point, with these main ones in the front, I'm adding the marks, the scarring where branches have fallen off, very common in Australian eucalypts as these are, and also some of the indications of the bark, which at the time of year when I took this photo was hanging off slightly. There were some remnants of bark still there. And the fact that the bark for this particular type of eucalyptus is a different type and a different colour, a darker brown, lower down and thicker and sort of a crusty bark, as opposed to higher up where it's a very thin, smooth bark that falls off in strips and curls, a bit like thin strips of cellophane when it falls off. So I'm continuing to do this and to do some lines to indicate hatching. Now, the thing with nature, there's going to be a lot of marks on the paper if we're going to try and capture some degree of what's here. Now, we have no chance to draw everything we see, and we're not going to be trying to anyway. But to capture the sense of profusion, we will have to put a lot of marks on the paper, and also to create the values, to create the darknesses that we have. We're going to need to do a lot of hatching. So hatching is going to be really important. So this is also a really good demo to watch if you get confused about how to hatch, because the point is there is no way to hatch. The question is always what direction of lines and how many lines I position and how many lines I layer over the top of each other or don't will create the effect I want. And the effect is the contrast, how easily we see between different objects. It's also the color of the object, and it's also then the impact of shade and or shadow on that color. So these are the things that we use hatching to represent. And the direction, the right direction, is the one that best captures visually the effect you want. Now, you'll notice that I mostly hatch tree trunks horizontally. It takes a bit more time, but I think it creates a much more realistic effect, certainly for trunks that are closer to us. It also means we can use vertical lines or near vertical lines for other marks and hatching that we might want to put on the trunk surface for the scarring and so forth, bark peeling off, and not have it get lost when we do hatching horizontally for shade over the top. Because the big challenge is to keep a sense of distinctiveness between the different elements, and then also between the foreground elements and the midground and background elements. So we have this clump of trees and a shrub sort of in between them. That's our foreground component, as well as the grass in front. And we mustn't forget the grass in front and the bits of bark that have fallen at the base of the trees. Now, what's really important when we have a complex scene such as this of nature is to divide it into layers, into depths of plane that go back, and to really almost get a list of what things are in front of what are the closest things, what's the next thing behind, what's the next thing behind, what's the next thing behind, particularly with branches. If we want to have a sense of a tangle of branches, the tangle still has to make sense. There has to be a consistency in what's in front of the things further back, in front of the things further back again. And the only way we can create that order is to have it ordered in our mind, in our thinking, before we start to draw. So we're always in a scene such as this thinking, what's closer than what? And you can see with I don't like to use the word outlining, but the marks I'm putting on to help me position the trees further back, I'm doing particularly branches that go horizontally sooner rather than later, so that I don't inadvertently put a tree trunk through the middle of them. It's not as important when we're in the far distance, but it is very important in the elements that are closer to us, because that helps us read what we're seeing. It helps create separation, and it helps create a realistic sense of depth, which will aid us in seeing what this scene is, in identifying the objects, even though we've lost the colour, which can be a big help in nature, particularly the greenish versus the brownish, greyish components of the bush, certainly of the Australian bush. And I'm starting now to do some of the leaves that are closest. Now, of course, I'm not trying to draw leaves, but I'm trying to work out where the tree leaf canopies are. And there aren't too many that are too close, but I want to put marks to reserve the space and to start to, in my mind, create a stronger picture now of what we have when we move further back from the tree trunks. I've been very branch timber focused, and now I need to get foliage focused as well. Now, with this sort of scene, I certainly don't feel obliged to render my drawing exactly as the photo looks. I'm a great believer in we use our photo reference as a springboard to create the drawing that we want. Within that, we can make more of a difference from the reference than less, or we can be as closely connected to it as we can and still end up with a good drawing. But particularly in values in a scene such as this, I often exaggerate the values one way or the other, make them lighter or darker, to create greater clarity in the overall scene, to separate different objects out. And as you look at me do this, pay particular attention to this strategy, this drawing technique of using my hatching to help define what's what and where it is. Hatching is so much more than just shade and shadow. When we think that hatching is the way we just represent shade, and we can end up with very almost blots of darkness on our surfaces. It is not that. It is used to represent different values, and shade and shadow are often quite subtle values as well. And so we want to get used to firstly perceiving the values in our reference, and then thinking, now, what values will best suit the scene I'm trying to draw? For a quick change of pace, I edit these walking in a national park, and a local resident came by to visit the Australian lyrebird on our 10-cent coin. You'll notice this tree on the left-hand side. I've particularly made a point of doing dark values for the foliage to the left of that tree, more so darker values than in the reference. But I really want this tree to stand out as, well, it's the second closest tree, in fact. Now, the tree to the right of it, I've made darker as well, because I want the right-hand side of that most left-hand tree to stand out. But I've done the hatching all horizontally. hopefully to reinforce the idea this is a tree trunk and it's not some leaves on a bush that's further back. So I've used different marks for the value on the left-hand side than the right-hand side because I'm trying to create the effect of light on different objects. And basically I'm moving back and forth across the scene trying to do that. Now the other thing I have to bear in mind though, if I'm trying to create clarity and realism and a sense of 3 dimensions in my nature scene while I'm doing the hatching, is to bear in mind that darker hatching will feel closer and lighter hatching will sit further back. That echoes what happens in life where things further away look lighter because we're looking through more atmosphere to see them, I assume. And if there's colour involved, then the colour becomes less intense, becomes a slightly drabber version of the local colour, of how that colour would look if we went up close and looked at it. Now, once I got past the front group of large tree trunks, I switched to a 0.2mm pen. If you're finding this helpful, please hit the like button for me. That helps me out as much as I hope this video is helping you out in some way in developing your drawing skills. And in lots of ways now, by this stage, I'm looking at my drawing more than I'm looking at the reference. Perhaps to a fault, but what I'm really focusing on now, what marks will create the separation, the clarity, the distinction, the sense of 3 dimensions. Where is it not working quite as well as I would like it to, and therefore what do I have to do to bring it more into line? And this working things out also includes, if I've gone too dark somewhere already, can I make adjustments that I hadn't planned to make that will lessen the impact of it being too dark here? It's very easy, and if you look at this now, I think you'll see a few spots where I've gone a bit too black right up next to a tree trunk. This is where it's good to actually go a bit lighter. I did make the mistake of going out too fast and hard early on with the hatching. I think because it was such a complex scene, I was hoping to establish some reference points that would make it easier when I hatched everything else. But generally, the best approach to take with scenes such as this is to go easily with the lines, with the marks that we put for the hatching. Not the ones that we put for surface features or local colour, but the ones that actually are for the shade and shadows, for the relative values. And what we don't want to do is create the effect that things have almost like a heavy halo glow around them, only black instead of white. And you'll see in a moment, when I take off the tape, when I think I'm finished, I go back and make some more adjustments, because visually, when we're totally now surrounded by a white border, that also changes the way something looks. And the thing I do at that point particularly is that large bush that's sort of in between this cluster of trees that are closest to us, I decide to make darker, quite a lot darker, to show the fact that the local colour, that the colour that it is quite a dark value compared to the trees. I can't lighten the trees, but I can make this large shrub darker. But the problem looking at it at the end, and have a look and let me know what you think, is I make it so dark in the end that it feels like it's closer than it really is, that it's closer than some of the trees that are actually closer to us. And this is the point I was saying. See, right now it's sort of looking okay, I think, but in a moment I'll take the tape off and I'll make the whole thing a bit darker again. Now, with this foliage in the upper right section, if you look at the reference photo, it's very complex. So I'm really not trying to draw the leaves at all. I'm trying to create the lights and darks with quite detailed hatching, quite a lot of hatching. There are times where we have to really pull back our perception of what we're drawing when it comes to nature and just draw the lights and darks. Now, it is a bit of a time commitment. This drawing took me about 1 hour, 15 minutes to do, which is, and it's not very large, which is longer than I would normally spend on a YouTube video drawing. And you're watching it at 4 times the normal speed. So if you use the cog icon that YouTube provides and slow the video down to half speed, then you'll actually watch me draw it at double time, which, if you're more interested in the detail of the technique, will give you a chance perhaps to see it a little more clearly, a little more carefully. But at this point, I'm filling in the gaps, basically, the sections of the furthest background that I haven't done. And I do always leave the furthest background till last, because I find that it's easy to end up going too dark for those indications of furthest foliage and whatnot. Although most of the depths of plane in this scene are still relatively close, we don't really have glimpses that go back into the very far distance as we might in a panorama from a lookout. So now I peel off the tape, and in a moment you'll see me make the adjustments on that bush, and tell me, do you think it works better now, so get a sense of how it looks now, or after I've done the overworking or the working over? I don't mean to imply it's overworked, but you might think it is. So let me know what you think. And again, if you haven't hit the like button yet, please do, especially if you've got to this stage. And I'd love to hear in the comment what you find the biggest challenge is when you draw nature. Is there some nature scene you want to draw but you feel overwhelmed by? Crashing surf, for instance? Clouds in the sky? Some subjects too are better suited to certain media than others, and a thin black line is not necessarily the best one. What do you think? You'll find the reference, of course, on my channel community page if you want to have a go. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope this was interesting. I hope it was helpful. These scenes are not so much a different technique as a different way of firstly seeing and perceiving and thinking of our subject. We're not drawing shapes or objects. We're creating instead an overall effect largely through hatching. But in the end, however you like to draw it and however it turns out, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.